Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. When a COVID-19 vaccine is available, most of the world will have access to it thanks to a unique platform for international cooperation called the COVAX Facility. The COVAX Facility, which is also sometimes referred to as the COVAX Pillar, is essentially a platform for pooled investments in the development, manufacture, and distribution of a COVID-19 vaccine. At time of recording, 172 countries have entered into an initial agreement with COVAX. This includes about 80 wealthier countries that would be able to purchase the vaccine on their own, and 92 lower-income countries which would not be able to self-finance the procurement of a vaccine. The goal of the COVAX facility is to cover 20% of the population of all participating countries by the end of 2021. This amounts to about 2 billion doses. COVAX is co-led by 3 entities: the World Health Organization, GAVI, the Global Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition for Pandemic Preparedness Innovations. Of these organizations, GAVI The Vaccine Alliance administers COVAX. And on the line with me to explain how COVAX works is the Managing Director for Country Programs at GAVI, Thabani Maphosa. We kick off discussing how the COVAX facility was formed before having a broader conversation about how it works and why global cooperation on the development and distribution of a vaccine is a far more effective way to end this pandemic than countries going it alone. This episode is part 2 of a series examining how the COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to new forms of international cooperation to accelerate the end of the pandemic. Part 1, released last week, is my interview with the CEO of the Coalition for Pandemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI. This is an entity that has made early and ongoing investments in the development and manufacture of vaccines that will be made equitably available to countries that are participating in the COVAX facility. This includes some of the more promising vaccines that are already in advanced human trials. I'm very happy to bring this episode to you today. COVAX is not a particularly well-known entity on the global scene. It's very new, but ultimately it will be profoundly impactful in ending this pandemic. The 172 countries that have so far agreed to participate in COVAX represent something like 70% of the world's population. So it is not a stretch to say that when this pandemic is over, it will have been brought to its end through global cooperation facilitated through COVAX. So if you are new to the podcast, I just want to say welcome. Please visit globaldispatchespodcast.com to peruse our robust archives of conversations about topical and thematic global issues that sometimes don't make headlines but should. You can also find part 1 of this series there or by subscribing to the podcast where you're listening to this episode. And I always love hearing from you. You can hit me up on Twitter at Mark L. Goldberg or use the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com to reach out to me with whatever is on your mind. I look forward to your comments and questions. All right, now here is my conversation with Thabani Maphosa, Managing Director for Country Programs at GAVI The Vaccine Alliance.
The COVAX pillar was really born out of a conversation or a coming together of the EU and WHO as part of a broader set of pillars that were called access to COVID tools. and it was meant to create a set of tools that were going to help the world to come up in a joint manner to respond to the COVID pandemic.
And some of these pillars include like diagnostics and some include treatment. And one of them, the one that GAVI is the administrator of, is the COVAX pillar, the vaccine pillar. Is that right?
That's correct. And GAVI is administrating the COVAX pillar, but working very closely with CEPI.
In an ideal situation, in sort of the ideal formulation of how the COVAX pillar would work, how would COVAX succeed in helping to bring the world a COVID vaccine? What does that success look like in its ideal form?
Sure. That success, if I were to sum it up, it is about getting as many doses of vaccines to as many countries as is possible and as fast as is possible as well. So it's about scale, it's about speed, it's about I think I said scale in terms of number of countries, but scale in terms of the quantum of the number of people reached in the first instance when the vaccine is available.
And so how does it work? Can you walk me through how the COVAX pillar works?
So the COVAX pillar is really built on tenets of demand and supply, and the tenet of risk-taking and guaranteeing. What happens is that as many countries express their interest to work with the COVAX pillar, they give first by just that expression of interest, the confidence and the risk-taking or the moving at risk for manufacturers and other players to assume that there is a demand that can back their efforts of pursuing this effort. There is no point in pursuing an effort only to come back and discover that the demand is not going to be there. So just the expression of interest is important as a starting point for the manufacturers and other players and other important stakeholders to go forward at risk to start putting resources and investing in making sure that they double down in the work of getting us a vaccine.
So step one is basically governments telling you formally, I suppose, in like a letter that, yes, we are interested in potentially procuring vaccines through the COVAX pillar for our population. And you use that to, and you show that letter of intent to manufacturers, which gives them a degree of confidence.
That's correct. Yeah. Then step two is obviously one of on the supply side, which is working with a number of manufacturers and trying to make sure that there are some advanced commitments of what they could provide to the COVAX facility. So each of the manufacturers that it's not one, it's pursuing many. And the reason for pursuing many manufacturers is that at this stage, we really don't know which vaccine is going to be successful. And it's really about betting on a number of players and working with them, but getting their commitment to say, as we work with them, and as we give them the guarantee of the demand side, they will also give us the guarantee or a similar handshake in terms of some supply to whatever is considered a reasonable quantity. So there's a game of numbers on the supply side. And the game of numbers here is really focusing on the number of vaccine players and manufacturers that we engage. And then the second tier is the number that they actually commit at in advance as something that they will be open to provide.
Because the idea is that, most vaccines will fail in trials. So you're betting on as many vaccine research as possible, but simultaneously, you're also betting on just the ability of vaccines to be manufactured at scale as well.
That's correct. Because the technology is also different of these vaccines. They fall under a number of categories of the technology that is being used to actually produce or identify the vaccine, and the manufacturing capacity in terms of its ability to stretch is also something that is not clear at this stage. And we can go even further down when we think about the delivery. There will be differences in the cold chain that may be required. And so we need to actually anticipate all those unknowns that have to be thought about here.
And of course, that takes a lot of money. And so far, you in sort of your step-by-step process, what we're talking about seems to be handshake agreements and not actually money going to the COVAX pillar. At what point in this process are you soliciting contributions from wealthier countries?
So even with this handshake, there is two sets of countries. There is GAVI eligible countries that we are calling the AMC 92. These are lower income countries that could be supported through voluntary donations, through a mechanism that is part of this broad facility, or which is a sister mechanism called the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment. So this is supported through donations. But there is also a set of countries that is self-financing that have agreed to be part of this group as well, and they would actually finance from their own public finances, and the how much of that gets to be defined as the process evolves.
Mm-hmm. So the idea is that many countries, wealthier countries around the world, can self-finance the provision of vaccines to their populations, but lower income countries don't have that capacity. So, what is your investment case to wealthier countries who, every day I read another article about a, wealthier country securing a bilateral agreement with a vaccine manufacturer to purchase doses for their population. Why are wealthier countries still interested in working with the COVAX pillar?
The truth is that the supply, when we look into 2021, the best production and with the best production of vaccines will still be insufficient. The supply will be restricted, or not restricted as deliberately restricted, but it will be constrained by the manufacturing capacity. So with that in mind, there is no single manufacturer who is going to probably go on a bilateral agreement. Even the manufacturers, they do want to hedge themselves by dealing with more than a single player in this process. And the truth is, for the wealthier countries, if they were to try to do these agreements, remember at the beginning we agreed that the vaccines, a number of them will fail. That is a given. And if you are going to be entering into multiple bilateral investments, it becomes extremely expensive to do it alone. But when you do it in a pooled mechanism, which has actually a broader set of choices, your chances of actually securing something in that space is increased. But the bilateral agreements, yes, they are good in terms of comfort of saying you are making progress, but they don't guarantee you that you'll get something. With the COVAX facility, while it doesn't guarantee you that you will get, your chances and the probability of getting something is much higher because of the diversity of the number of players that are in this step.
Okay, so basically, it's almost like an insurance policy. You're a government. You could be a government that makes bilateral investments in single, trials or single vaccines. But you could also simultaneously invest in this kind of pooled mechanism to hedge your bets a little bit, because this pooled mechanism, COVAX, is supporting like a whole bunch of different vaccines and manufacturers. And so chances are that, one or two of them probably will hit.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
So how many vaccine trials is COVAX currently supporting? And on the manufacturer side, what does that support look like? Because, once you have a vaccine, creating billions of doses is a whole other logistical hurdle.
Sure. The number is changing on a so often basis, and I'm trying to check it out here very quickly. In terms of the numbers that are sitting in the COVAX vaccine facility. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Probably a minimum of 14. And I say a minimum because this number is constantly evolving.
Say one of those vaccines hits. So my understanding actually is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is something that's been supported through the COVAX pillar. Is that right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So, that is in the world one of the most advanced vaccines right now in terms of the steps that it takes to bring it to market. So what does the COVAX support of that Oxford vaccine look like? How did that support manifest itself?
At the moment, with the AstraZeneca, I think we were probably the first to sign a commitment with them in terms of an agreement with them in terms of what they commit to provide to our set of countries. So they were the first in of those players. And I think we have guaranteed to them that that supply will be absorbed. And so it gives them the confidence to begin expanding and looking at their manufacturing capacity to say, can it respond to us and to others? And I think that's where the risk of by how much do they need to expand their capacity comes in. On the basis of the underwriting that they perceive.
Because of your support for them, they have a commitment to provide vaccines at a reasonable cost to GAVI to then go on to like the 92 least developed countries that are part of the GAVI Alliance?
Yes, and in this particular situation, it's for every member of the COVAX facility, including the self-financing countries. There is a formula that will actually allow distribution to all parties that are part of the facility without prioritizing the developing countries alone or the other countries alone. But it's a formula that takes into account that the commitment on the demand side that has been put forward has come through as a result of all these parties.
And so what does that formula look like? So say this AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is successful and it's able to be manufactured at scale. What does the formula of distribution of the vaccine look like through because of its partnership with COVAX?
So the COVAX facility is designed on the principle of equal allocation of doses. Between all countries, regardless of income levels. So that's, I think, the principle that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. And the goal is to provide sufficient doses for 20% of the population of all participating countries.
Yeah, so 20%, presumably that's for like healthcare workers and people who are particularly vulnerable.
Yes. So that 20% is for frontline health workers and for the high risk populations, which, as you have pointed out, will be the elderly and any others who have pre-existing conditions.
Should or if this Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine be a success, through the COVAX pillar, participating countries like, say, the United Kingdom, or like, which is, one of the self-financing countries, or a poorer country like, I don't know, maybe Mali is one of your 92 countries that is not able to self-finance. They would also receive a 20%, a dosage amount equivalent of 20% of their population.
That's correct. And these doses will actually be delivered in trenches as and when supplies are available. But I think the first priority would be the frontline health workers. And the second would be the high risk populations or the high risk groups. This is dependent on supply. But the other side that I need to say, it's also dependent on country readiness. Because a number of countries we are working with a number of countries to get them ready, but not all countries will be ready at the same time.
And this includes, say, for example, you need a cold chain. You need to set up the logistics of distribution via a cold chain in some countries, but some countries
Correct.
just might not be ready. Okay.
Yeah. So some countries may not be ready. Yeah.
And how many self-financing countries have contributed funding so far to COVAX pillar?
So I would say that not contributed funding, but have made their expressions of interest more formally at this stage. So 81 countries will be financing from their own budgets.
But you haven't actually received contributions from them. All of those 81 countries.
It's a commitment. It's an expression of interest as a commitment, and now we've begun working on binding agreements with them.
So, how much do you need? And like, would countries be expected to contribute whatever the equivalent of the cost of 20% of their population coverage would be?
For these ones, yes, I think taking the at-risk investments and what have you, they would need to be contributing for that amount at the minimum, because once we get started with the 20%, obviously, for GAVI, we will continue making sure that we are working with the developing countries, but we will be thinking that we would have created at least the first base of making sure that the world is equally protected, or at least we have reduced the risk of COVID-19 spreading any faster by actually putting the fire out where it is most raging.
I mean, one thing that makes, I think, my conversation with you right now so interesting to me, and I'm, speaking to you from the United States, is that, what you are articulating to me is a really kind of complex mechanism for multilateral cooperation, like vaccine multilateralism, is what it's sometimes called. And, it is set against another competing force, which is, vaccine nationalism, in which you're having countries try to gobble up and secure doses with through bilateral agreements. And, here in the United States, we are practicing vaccine nationalism, almost every day. First of all, has the U.S. sent a letter of commitment to the COVAX pillar?
No, I do not believe the U.S. has.
Mm-hmm. So presumably that means that if this Oxford AstraZeneca becomes made available, the U.S. won't receive it through that COVAX pillar unless it makes a bilateral deal.
Yeah, it wouldn't. It would receive it through bilateral deals.
Mm-hmm. And if a country has a bilateral deal with AstraZeneca, but is also part of the COVAX pillar, how does that work?
We see that as complementary. The fact is, this country still has a responsibility for its population, and we have not presented the COVAX pillar as a panacea or as the only solution. We think complementarity of solutions in the market space and good coordination between those. The EU, for instance, has had some bilateral deals recently, but we are coordinating very closely with them, and so it's making sure that as they do that, we have a conversation where it may present a tension point of maybe, especially for GAVI, undercutting the ability of making sure that the developing countries have equitable access as well.
And is there like an argument to be made, or what is the argument that vaccine multilateralism is a superior way to confront the coronavirus pandemic than, a patchwork of vaccine nationalisms?
Well, the simple answer here is that no one wins this race until everyone wins the race. The fact is that we are not safe unless everybody is safe, and it is important to tackle this with a multilateral view and lens. I think it is as simple as all that. It is important to, of course, do the best that you can do for your people, but at the same time, think that when your neighbor is not secure, it does not land well for your economy or for the safety of your own people ultimately, because not everybody is going to accept the vaccines. We are still having challenges that we will have to deal with of vaccine hesitancy in some countries, which means that you will still deal with some of that coming through, and raising the immunity across the bar, if we can help it, would be an important thing.
Yeah, like I can imagine a situation here in the United States a year or two from now where a good chunk of the population is somehow suspicious of an effective vaccine, so a good chunk is not immune, and by then air travel and global commerce will commence, and so I would imagine that you could see a lot of imported cases here in the United States, which could have problematic health consequences for people, but also just economic consequences as well. If things need to be shut down because there are these localized outbreaks.
Yep. So I would argue that it is to everybody's benefit to collaborate and see this. It is a pandemic, and sitting right at the heart of the definition of a pandemic is that it is hitting all of us. And so if you start treating it as if it's an endemic type of a disease that is only affecting your country, you miss the fact that it's a global health issue, and the threat will always come from without, and cooperation is needed.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was absolutely fascinating. Like I said, it's just like a really unique and innovative example to me of multilateral cooperation to confront an urgent threat. And you are at the heart of that. So thank you on behalf of humanity. But thank you again for speaking with me.
No, thank you as well for profiling this work. It's one piece to fight the battle that we have before us. But an important piece at that.
All right. Thank you to Thabani. That was very helpful. And if you have not already done so, I recommend that you go back and listen to part 1 of this series, my interview with the CEO of CEPI, Richard Hatchett. I think together, this conversation and that prior one does a really good job of explaining how international cooperation will end this pandemic by accelerating the development and distribution of a vaccine. And as I mentioned at the outset, please do feel free to reach out to me if there's anything on your mind, if you have suggestions of people you'd like me to interview or topics you'd like me to cover, or you just want to let me know what's on your mind. I'd love to hear from you. All right. Thank you to... and as I mentioned at the outset, please do feel free to reach out to me. You can do so using the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com. I love hearing from you. All right. We'll see you next time. Bye.